despite the fact that God has given us so much, we still didn't get it. And Moses tells us that we're going to leave all that has happened and all the amazing things that he has done for us, and we're still not going to get it. Why? Because our hearts have not been circumcised. You have to read the Torah knowing that this is an unfinished story.
Hey friends, welcome back. We are here once again with Yoel Ben David. When I grew up, the Torah to me was a foreign language, literally because I hadn't learned Hebrew yet, but also metaphorically. I couldn't wrap my head around the concepts, and it seemed so otherworldly and esoteric and archaic. Yoel, you're known for teaching through the weekly Torah portions and helping people understand the meaning and significance of the Torah, which is so helpful. You can see links to those videos down in the description below. So what are some of the tips that you would give to people reading the Torah that might help them understand what it's trying to say?
I think there are a couple of tips that are always important to remember. Tip number one is going to remember who the author is. Now, that's easy to do, Exodus to the end of Deuteronomy. You're like, it's Moses, he's there, he's hanging around, God's talking to him even about writing it. But it's important to remember in Genesis as well. I think there's one particular story where this becomes incredibly relevant, which is at the end of Genesis in the book of chapter 50. And there we see Joseph burying his father Jacob and encountering his brothers now living in this sort of post-Jacob world. And the brothers are freaking out because they think now that dad's dead, Joseph is going to put upon us all the sort of vindictive revenge he wanted to, but didn't do it because he didn't want his dad to see, the violence. And so they sort of come to him and they're just like, Joseph, don't kill us. And they invent this whole story. And Joseph is just like, I don't want to kill you. And he reminds them this is part of God's plan. And that God turned the evil that they did into good, and even, saved all these people, of which he's referring to Egypt. Now, you're thinking, okay, that's a great story of fear and forgiveness overcoming fear and God's sovereignty, and it's all awesome. But then you have to remember that Moses wrote the story, and that he wrote this story to a bunch of Israelites having left the land of Egypt where their granddad and great-granddad had been slaves, and where maybe they had been a slave, or they're the next generation because mom and dad had died in the desert during the 40 years. They're like this next generation going into the promised land. And they're reading this story. And for them to see the sort of story of fear and forgiveness, and then seeing that this whole story in Genesis, and it's the story of Joseph, which takes up, 25% of the book of Genesis, the story of Joseph then comes to them and saying, well, hang on. And Joseph was sent in order to save who? To save the people of Egypt? And all of a sudden, my fears of, and my anger towards Egypt, and I want God to judge them. And all of a sudden, the story of forgiveness calling me to forgive my enemies. If Joseph could forgive the brothers that did this to him, how could I not? And so it becomes a story of forgiveness, a story of forgiving my enemies, a story of forgiving the people who have hurt me in the past. And so remembering who the author is and to whom he's writing the story to, I think are incredibly important tips for how you can keep reading through the 5 books of Moses and understanding what it's actually trying to say, and because now who he's speaking to. I think the next tip that I'm going to give is going to be the one that we talked about before, which is taking that place of cultural prejudice and superiority and trying to step your way out of that, trying to read it, try to understand ancient people, where they were at, what they were living through, and then trying to take the meaning out for yourself and to apply it to your life, rather than taking the literal word for word what it's saying. So for example, when you see the year of Jubilee, we'll use that as an example. Every 50 years, everybody's got to shut it all down, and all the bits of land that everybody received, everybody's got to go back to it. Right? Now, you might think, okay, well, how do I live that out? I live in the United States, or I live in Jerusalem. Yeah, does that mean I have to move home and this and that? We get caught in these over literalized interpretations. No, but what it does mean is that in the land of Israel, what God was trying to do was say that everybody deserves the opportunity to make a start, to make a go of it. And he wanted to set up a society where even if you did accumulate a great amount of wealth, or even if you did become, completely dirt poor, that everyone deserves a chance and everyone should be given that opportunity to, get something to start off with. And so when I see people who are poor, or I see people who don't have the opportunities, who don't have those abilities to make a go of something, I can't change state policy. But what I can do is I can do my best to come into their life and try to give them the start or the opportunities that maybe they haven't had before. And it's a great call to social reform and social change, not necessarily wagging your finger and holding out banners, but although that can be part of it. But it's a call to saying everyone deserves a chance. And if you're in a position to give someone a chance, give it to them. So those are some of the ways that you can take passages, try to understand what that means in that context. Put yourself in the place of a guy who was in debt and was maybe working as a servant in a rich man's house. And then he knew, in 2 years' time, the Jubilee is coming. And so that means that in 2 years' time, the boss that he's working for will let him go. He'll go back to the ancestral land where his granddad once worked and messed it all up and sold the land, and now they've been working for this guy for years. He gets to go back there and start afresh, and dream about, what am I going to do? What crops will I grow that will eventually be able to give enough food for my family, and maybe even begin a business.
Yeah. What does a curious Jewish person that's interested in Jesus, what kind of tip would you give that person, or any person looking through the Torah, the Tanakh even, and how to read it? Because you mentioned in the previous video that, and I agree with you, that the Tanakh is not, or the Torah is not a law book. It's a narrative. It's a book that has laws in it. That talks about what God was doing with the Jewish people at the time. What would you tell someone that's reading through the Torah and believes they have to stay there in order to be Jewish?
So first, I would read through this story of our redemption and recognize that, first of all, this is a story because the foundation of our relationship with God has to be one in which we recognize our total reliance upon him, and that he has taken us out of a certain way of living and a certain style of life and brought us into a different place by grace. Okay? Once you understand that, you then get to the end of the Torah, especially the book of Deuteronomy, and you recognize that despite the fact that God has given us so much, we still didn't get it. And Moses tells us that we're going to leave all that has happened and all the amazing things that he has done for us, and we're still not going to get it. Why?
Right.
And he mentions this in Deuteronomy, because our hearts have not been circumcised. You have to read the Torah knowing that this is an unfinished story.
Yeah.
Lots of us in this day and age where literature has fell in love with the unsatisfying, dark ending of the book, right? Nobody rounds out the story. Nobody leaves you with a happy ending anymore. People love these dark endings these days. The Torah has a dark ending.
Mm-hmm.
It says, hey, guess what? You're going to go into the land that God has given you, that he has redeemed you for and created you for, and going to bring you into it, and you are going to screw it up, right? And that's what he clearly tells us is going to happen. But then he says, then God is going to do something among our people, and he's going to circumcise our hearts, and he's going to change this world, and it's going to be awesome. And that's what you're looking for. That is where we're going. And that is where people like myself and Jeff and others have found that Jesus is the place where this renewal begins. Right? And that when Jesus dies on the cross and rises from the dead, it's not this sort of like magical formula to forgive us of our sins, but it's also a place where creation restarts. Where Jesus comes out of the grave and a new world has begun, and that new world starts to get created within the lives of people, and those people are called to bring that new world into the world around them. And it's sort of like Jesus is this second Egypt, this second moment where not physically but spiritually he brings people from all different places of the world into not the land of Israel, but into a kingdom of God. And so we're trying to create Edens in all these different places where people have come to faith in Jesus and are trying to bring about this new world and actually see it happen in front of them as God works through them and bring. So that's what I would like, if you read the Torah as this story of God saving people, bringing them to a place of grace so that they can start this new project and live a new world, you see that it's not working out, and you see the whole plan eventually leading to what he has done today, which is slowly brought people out to create places of beauty and love and kindness in this dark world. I think you're beginning to see what the Torah was pointing us to.
Thank you so much, Yoel. Really appreciate your insight and wisdom here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can find information on Yoel down in the description, including his weekly Torah portion videos, which are short, fun, and educational. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description. If you'd like to chat with us live, you can go to jewsforjesus.org, and may you all find peace and hope in Yeshua.